McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 4, Chapter 11, Sculpture and Installation. Chapter Outline, Methods and Materials of Sculpture, Working with Time and Place, the Human Figure in Sculpture. Methods and Materials of Sculpture. Sculpture is three-dimensional art made in the round or in relief and has a relationship with the space around it. Sculpture is three-dimensional art made in the round or in relief and has a relationship with the space around it. Visitors arriving at the Guggenheim Museum in Balboa find it guarded by a very strange and unsettling presence, a nearly 30-foot tall bronze sculpture of a spider. Even less expected is the spider's name, maman, the French word for mum. For the artist Louise Bourgeois, maman is a metaphor for her own mother as seen through a child's eyes, awesomely tall, protective, patient, and skilled. Bourgeois' mother wove and repaired tapestries for a living. A female spider spins a web to provide for herself and a cocoon to protect her young. Viewers make their own associations and explore their own feelings as they circle the bronze figure, wander into the open cage of a mama's cascading legs, or gaze upward at the compact body with its clutch of eggs suspended high overhead. Maman is a sculpture in the round, or a freestanding work that can be viewed from any angle, for it is finished on all sides. It exists in our world, sharing our space in three dimensions. Not all sculpture is finished in the round. The work shown in this image is from an ancient Middle East, and it's an example of a relief sculpture in which forms project from but remain attached to the background surface. A relief is meant to be viewed frontally, the way that we view a painting. It projects slightly into our space, but it has a supporting material that keeps it from fully interacting with our world. Artists in many cultures have animated the surfaces of important objects in architecture with relief sculpture. The carving illustrated here is a deity with the body of a man, with wings and the head of an eagle. It once hung on the walls of a palace in present-day Iraq that was covered in relief carvings picturing the ruler and the different gods. The deity here is using a pine cone to sprinkle water from the bucket he holds. His body is robust, with individual muscles and even tendons visible. His clothing, sandals, hair, and wings have meticulously described texture and detail. The plants are stylized in repeating pattern of identical leaves. The markings that run across the middle of the sculpture form a text, a writing system developed in ancient Middle East. The work of the eagle-headed deity is carved in low relief. Sometimes it's called by its French name, bas-relief. It's a technique in which figures project only slightly from the background. Coins, for example, are modeled in low relief, such as the portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the 1-cent coin. A sculpture in which the forms project more boldly from their background is called high relief. Forms modeled in high relief generally project to at least half their understood depth. The 13th century relief from India, shown in this figure, depicts a battle between the goddess Durga and the buffalo demon Mahisha. In the center, the 8-armed Durga appears in hierarchical scale, standing victoriously over the smaller Mahisha and his supporters, who appear below. Each of Durga's hands holds a weapon the gods gave her to battle the demon. The figures in this dynamic composition are all carved well away from the background, some considerably more than half round, including Durga's arms, the buffalo and the fallen fighter on the right. The mask and the ornamentation in the background, on the other hand, are in much lower relief. Methods and materials of sculpture. Carving is an ancient subtractive method of making sculpture, usually in stone and wood. Carving is an ancient subtractive method of making sculpture, and it's usually done in stone and wood. Carving is the oldest method for making sculpture, dating to more than 3,500,000 years ago. In this process, the sculptor begins with a block of material and cuts, chips, and gouges away until the form of the sculpture emerges. Stone and wood are the principal materials for carving, and both have been used by artists around the world and throughout history. Ancient Olmec artists working in today's Mexico used basalt for their monumental stone carvings, but these were not the stones that they had on hand. Boulders weighing up to 44 tons were quarried and dragged for miles to a riverbank, then floated by barge to a landing point near their final destinations. Olmec sculptors then shaped the hard stone using still harder stone tools, probably quartz blades. Carved in a broad style of plain surfaces and subtle modeling, the monumental sculptures are thought to represent the Olmec rulers. Scholars believe that the basalt material was selected for its symbolic value. A volcanic stone that emerges in molten form from the Earth's interior, basalt was associated with the awesome power of nature. It was thus a fitting material for rulers who were believed to have the awesome power of journeying into the spirit world and back. Carving is an ancient subtractive method of making sculpture, usually in stone or in wood. Tilman Riemenschneider, one of Germany's foremost sculptors of the late Middle Ages, carved this piece, Saints Christopher and his three helpers. Originally part of a grouping of 14 saints whom Catholics turn to for help, the three figures are identified by their attributes. Saint Christopher carries the infant Jesus on his shoulder and helps him cross a swollen river. Saint Augustus, a Christian convert into the Roman army, wears armor. Saint Emerus, an early bishop also known as Saint Elmo, wears the hat and the robe of his office. A soft wood with a close uniform grain, lime wood, carves easily. Each figure stands in a unique pose, yet seemingly frozen in time. We can readily see their individual features, gaunt cheeks, furrowed brows, and thin lips, and the details that distinguish the hair from the clothing and from the water. Most prominently, the work features the stiff, angular drapery favored by Northern European artists around 1500. Methods and materials of sculpture. Modeling and molds are direct, additive sculptural processes, frequently done in clay. Modeling and molds. They are a direct method of sculpture using additive processes, and they're frequently done in clay. In fact, the most common modeling material is clay. Clay is an earth substance found in most parts of the world. Wet clay is pliable, and few can resist the temptation to squeeze and shape it. As long as clay remains wet, the sculptor can do almost anything with it. Add more and more clay to build up the form, gouge away its sections, pinch it outward, and scratch into it with a sharp tool. Smooth it with the hands, press it against an uneven surface. But when the clay form has dried and been fired or heated to a very high temperature, it becomes hard. The fired clay is surprisingly durable, which has allowed many examples of ancient pottery to survive into the present day. This portrait is a portrait vessel, and it was made by the Mochi people of South America. Using modeling and pre-prepared mold, the damp clay was pressed into the mold to establish the basic shape. Then the face was modeled by hand, worked with tools of stone and wood. Finally, the sculpted head was painted. The portrait vessels have individualized features, such as the broad nose and the piercing eyes of this figure. The headdress and the ear ornaments identify this figure as a ruler. And works like this would have been used in a ritual. They would have been placed in tombs, or may have been given as diplomatic gifts to neighboring communities. Methods and materials of sculpture. Casting is an indirect sculptural process. It involves liquefied material and a hollow mold, as in the lost wax process and the investment casting. Casting. In contrast to modeling, casting seems like an indirect method of creating a sculpture. Sometimes the sculptor never touches the final piece at all. Anything that can be melted can be cast, although metals are the most commonly used material. Superheated until it flows, the metal will pour freely into the tiniest crevices and forms, and then harden to extreme durability. This head of a king from Ife in today's Nigeria was made by a Yoruba artist using molten brass. Accidentally discovered at a construction site, the sculpture was made sometime between 1300 and 1450, when Ife was a thriving city-state within a vast trade network. The artist produced sculptures not just in brass, but also terracotta, bronze, and stone. This sculpture of a ruler's head is a life-size naturalistic rendering of a man wearing a beaded headpiece painted in red and black. The lines running down the face represent the scarification he would have had in life. A beard and a mustache may have once been attached to the holes around the mouth and along his jaw. The Yoruba head of a king was made using the lost wax process. Dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, the concept is simple and ingenious. First, a core is built up of specially prepared clay. Over this core, the sculptor models the finished head in a layer of wax. When the sculpture is complete, the wax rods and the wax cup are attached to it to form a sort of arterial system, and metal pins are driven through the wax sculpture into the core inside. The whole is encased in specially prepared clay. When the clay has dried, it is heated so that the wax melts and runs out, hence lost wax, and the clay hardens. The lost wax leaves a head-shaped void inside the block. Where the wax rods and the block were, the channels and the depression, called a coring cup, remains. The pins hold up the core in place, preserving the space where the wax was. Next, the mold is righted and the molten metal is poured into the pouring cup. The metal enters the mold through the channels, driving the air before it. When the metal bubbles up through the air channels, it is a sign that the mold is properly filled. Metal, therefore, has replaced the wax, which is why the casting is known as a replacement method. When the metal has cooled, the mold is broken apart, freeing the head. The channels, now cast in metal as well, are cut away, and the clay core is removed, if desired, and the holes or other flaws are patched and repaired, and the head is ready for smoothing and polishing. The Italian artist Benvenuto Cellini left behind a description of his lost wax casting process for the sculpture of Perseus with the head of Medusa. The work pictures the idealized figure of the Greek mythological hero Perseus, the son of Zeus. He was sent to fight the Gorgon Medusa, a snake-haired monster who turned to stone anyone who looked at her face. Using a mirrored shield that allowed him to see only her reflection, Perseus slew Medusa, severing her head. Along with the blood flowing from her neck came the winged horse Pegasus, whom the goddess Athena tamed and gave to Perseus. Any material that hardens from a liquefied state can be cast to make a sculpture. Artists today use metals, ceramics, plastic, and even blood in their cast works. Gianni Antoni used chocolate and soap for lick and lather. The work features 14 busts, 7 made of chocolate and 7 made of soap. Antoni's work addresses what she calls the rituals we perform in our daily lives. We eat, we bathe, we move. Her goal for lick and lather is to explore ideas of beauty and desire. Antoni chose the number 7 for the bust to refer to the ancient Greek and Roman proportion systems that make the height of a female body 7 times the height of her head. Any material that hardens from a liquefied state can be cast to make a sculpture. Artists today use metals, ceramics, plastic, even blood in their cast works. Gianni Antoni used chocolate and soap for lick and lather. The work features 14 busts, 7 made of chocolate and 7 made of soap. Antoni's work addresses what she calls the rituals we perform in our daily lives. We eat, we bathe, we move. Her goal for lick and lather is to explore ideas of beauty and desire. Antoni chose the number 7 for the bust to refer to the ancient Greek and Roman proportion systems that make the height of a female body 7 times the height of her head. Antoni created a mold of her head in the manner of the classical portrait bust. She then filled the mold with the two materials in their liquid state. When they cooled and hardened, the realistic bust exactly reproduced in her image. The artist then manipulated each bust. She licked the chocolate sculptures and washed herself with those made of soap. Each bust is therefore slightly different and reminds the viewers of the artist's presence. Methods and materials of sculpture. Assemblage process puts together found objects to create sculpture. Assemblage process puts together found objects to create a sculpture. Assembling is an additive process by which individual pieces, segments, or objects are brought together to form a sculpture. Some of the earliest assemblages were made by Dada artists such as Marcel Duchamp, who assembled found objects into works of art. The idea for assemblages came from the two-dimensional collages that George Braque and Pablo Picasso created from bits and scraps of paper, and then glued other material onto more paper. Picasso and the Dada artists brought the idea into 3 dimensions, combining found objects. This work, created by Joseph Cornell, Cornell is best known for his assemblages, which are placed in boxes. This work, which is entitled Untitled, The Life of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, Cornell has filled a wooden carrying case with a printed book, a portfolio of pictures, a glass miniature of a swan and its cardboard box, another box with swan bones, and a ceramic decorated with swans. As the description suggests, Cornell's assembled items, all created for different purposes, tell a story when brought together in the carrying case. Here the story refers to the Parisian king, Ludwig II, and his interest in swans and his tragic suicide. The sculptor Hama Baba assembling from found objects out of necessity. Materials were expensive for her as an art student, so she used what she found and combined it into organic forms. Scraps of wood, pieces of metal and plastic, styrofoam containers and packing pieces, chicken wire and sticks. All of these served as building blocks for the sculptures, such as Athenos. We see the diverse materials lashed together with clay molded around the head, hands, and the back to suggest skin. Unlike Cornell's pieces that brought existing meaning to the assemblage, each of Baba's materials lacks meaning on its own and is activated and energized when assembled into the work. The figurative, abstracted work can be viewed as haunting, with a passive face and a hopeless pose. The figure seems little like his swashbuckling namesake from the Three Musketeers, or the giant Athos who battled the gods in the Greek mythology. Methods and materials of sculpture. Digital processes involving spatial tools, printers, and computers are now used to create sculptures with precise cuts. Three-dimensional printers number among the recent technologies used to create sculpture. While several processes have been developed for commercial use since the 1980s, all 3D printing is an additive process. The technology many artists use adds thin layers of resin or clay beginning at the bottom and working towards the top. The resin is printed from a nozzle attached to an arm that moves in any direction that is on a horizontal plane. The same mechanics apply to 3D pens that produce a thin line of plastic as the artist moves it through the air. While the 3D printer follows the three-dimensional design created using the computer modeling software, the pen traces the movement of the artist's hand. Matthew Angelo Harrison creates clay sculpture using a 3D printer. It's actually a printer which he designed himself. It started with a wooden mask from Africa, a found cultural object. After scanning the mask, the artist printed it into clay and set it on a pedestal. The printed reproduction does not capture the surface detail of the carved wood. It instead degrades the original, softening its edges and blurring the details and revealing its status as a copy. Harrison's homemade printer exaggerates the degradation, adding a thick bead of clay in concentric layers we can see even after the sculpture is complete. In this work, Harrison also lets us see the coils inside the head, reminding us of the machine that made them. Exposing the manufacturing process is part of the concept. Harrison includes the printer as part of the work to connect the artist's vision to the final object. Digital processes involving special tools, printers, and computers are now used to create sculptures with precise cuts. The computerized numerical control, or CNC laser cutter, is another recent technology used in sculpture. A highly focused beam of light on a movable arm cuts through material placed on a flat bed. The laser's precise movements directed by the computer graphics software allow for smaller and more intricate patterns than possible with manual cutting techniques. Plasma cutting is a similar but less expensive method that uses electrified gas to cut designs into metal following commands from a computer. The metal cutting bits on the CNC routers do the same, but in plastic and in wood. Anelia Quanyam Agaha's Intersections is a cube made of 6 pieces of wood cut using a CNC laser cutter. It features geometric and floral designs organized with radial balance, with patterns repeating on all 6 sides. A light bulb suspended inside projects shadows onto the designs and onto the surrounding floor and walls and ceilings as well, and onto the viewers. Inspired by the patterned wood and tiles of Islamic art made centuries ago in southern Spain, Egha's work refers to her experiences as a woman in Pakistan and her identity as an immigrant in the United States. In both contexts, she felt excluded, always an outsider. The light and shadow challenge the difference between inside and out and public and private spaces. Working with time and place. Earthwork sculpture engages the natural world around it and is subjected to the forces of nature. Earthwork sculpture engages the natural world around it and is subjected to the forces of nature, such as in this work we saw earlier by Robert Smithson. Earthwork is a category of art made for a specific place using natural materials found there, especially the earth itself. As in Robert Smithson's Coil of Stones in the Great Salt Lake, another famous earthwork in the United States is the Serpent Mound near Locust Grove, Ohio. For almost 5,000 years, numerous Eastern American peoples built large-scale earthworks as burial sites and ceremonial centers. Serpent Mound was long thought to have been formed by the Hopewell people during the early centuries. Recently, however, scientific methods have suggested a date of around 1070 CE, long after the decline of the Hopewell culture. Serpent Mound contains no burials, and one archaeologist has suggested that the mound may have been created in response to a celestial event, the sighting of Halley's Comet, which flamed through the skies in 1066. Earthworks such as Serpent Mound and Spiral Jetty enter into the natural world and participate in its changes. The rain and the snow that fall, the vegetation that grows, and the blossoms even eventually decay. For artists such as Smithson, participating in the natural process was part of the art. Smithson assumed that his work would change slowly over time, and he embraced those changes as part of the ongoing life of his sculpture. In the earthworks of Andy Goldsworthy, the element of time moves to center stage. Goldsworthy makes earthworks that are ephemeral, often from such fleeting materials as ice, tree branches, or leaves, as in Two Stones, America and Scotland. Many of his works last no more than a few hours before the wind scatters them, the tide sweeps them away, or the sun melts them. The red and yellow leaves the artist put into the depressions in similar-looking stones in upstate New York and Scotland dried and blew away. Goldsworthy tries to go into nature every day and to make something from whatever he finds. He documents his work in photographs, including ones that record the work's disappearance over time as nature erases it. Time and change are connected to the place, he has written. Real change is best understood by staying in one place. Working with time and place. Installation art modifies a space and can be an immersive or interactive experience for viewers. Here is an example of installation art. With installation art, the artist modifies a space in some way and then asks us to enter, explore, and experience it. The idea of a room remains at the heart of many installations. A room is a space set apart from the rest of the world. It may be a place of refuge, of discovery, of secrets, or even of imprisonment. The room in Lisa Liu's trailer is the interior of a 1949 Spartan Mobile. She found the trailer abandoned in the woods and remade the interior completely. As with much of her artwork, the artist applied small glass beads to every surface. Walls, dishes, seats, typewriter, lamp. The beads drew attention to each item that would otherwise go unnoticed for its mundane functionality. Liu uses beads to make everyday objects beautiful and unpleasant things approachable. Liu began working with beads after a visit to a craft store while she was in art school. She found the beads more engaging than paint and began using tweezers to apply them to objects she found or made. The artist used the beads to draw attention to the labor, to the material, and to their qualities, and to the women artisans who have historically toiled without recognition. The beadwork attracted worldwide attention when Liu exhibited at a kitchen that she had crafted from found objects in paper mache and covered in millions of brightly colored beads. And in 2002, the creative value of her work was recognized with a $500,000 MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant Award. Trailer's sparky finish bellies its mysterious and grim story. Liu provided a narrative for this installation, basing the story on a history she invented for the trailer, imagining that it had been abandoned for bad reasons. Liu recreated an interior decor for a lonely, despairing hunter. The beads cover all of the surfaces that have a dark plate with lots of silver, black, and white. The books on the shelves are about a killing, and the art on the wall pictures are guns. The magazine on the table is entitled Men Today, Flesh Farm of Horror. A television inside the trailer plays a 1948 film, Force of Evil, and the movie's dialogue fills the space. Liu's dark story continues in the back part of the trailer, where discarded bottles and a gun rest next to the legs on an outstretched floor. The viewer is left to complete the story, as the rest of the figure is unseen. Liu has created truly an immersive experience. Installation art modifies a space and can be an immersive experience or an interactive experience for viewers. This work is entitled Fallen Garden. To make Fallen Garden, the artist strung common items on long threads hanging from the ceiling of a 17th century church. The found objects include plastic batteries, real cow dung, discarded paper, leaves, silk flowers, bones, and even a rubber snake. Visitors would lie on a circular couch set above a grave in the church's floor. As they gazed upward, the viewers saw a garden inspired by the story of Saint Uteska and his vision of a crucifix on a deer's forehead. The artist imagined this falling garden to be the forest where the deer lived. The installation used the vast space of the vaults strung with colorful items to transform the visitor's experience of the church. Annette Lawrence's installation Coin Toss consists of steel cables strung diagonally across a concourse at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. The stadium where the Dallas Cowboys football team plays is massive, with large open areas surrounding the entryways. Like all installations, Coin Toss forces us to see one of those spaces, to think about its shape and its purpose, and to be conscious of our movement through it. The hourglass shape created by the cables is meant to recall the repeated turning of a coin during the opening coin toss at a football game. The work seems to change and to move as we walk beneath it. Installation art has also used light to transform our perception of a space. In this piece, entitled Wander Through the Crystal World, we have an interactive installation, and it's made up of points of lights that merge to form natural images. This work is made by Team Lab, an interdisciplinary art collective, and the installation uses strings of LED lights to interact with visitors within the exhibition. As visitors send commands from the app, the LED lights of Wander Through the Crystal World flash in patterns that travel through the installation, falling like rain, scattering out of sight, or moving through the exhibition space like a wave or flock of birds. Some artworks are not made to last. For example, you can think about floats that you might see in a parade or at a festival. Artists also will use this idea of making artwork that's only meant to be experienced for a limited amount of time. Among the most famous artists who work with these ideas were the husband and wife team of Jean and Claude Christou. We've already seen the preliminary drawings they created for the gates, a project that filled New York City's Central Park with tall gates of saffron-colored fabric. On the opening day of the project, the workers went from gate to gate, freeing the banners, which unfurled and began to billow in the wind. As the winter sunlight played over and through them, the gates remained in place for 16 days, attracting 4 million visitors from all over the world. The American composer Aaron Copland once wrote an orchestral piece called Fanfare for the Common Man. In a similar spirit, the gates was like a majestic ceremonial walkway for everyone. Each visitor could experience the drapery fluttering overhead like banners in a parade. After 16 days, the project was removed. The material was made of steel and vinyl and nylon fabric, all of which were recycled, and the park was left just as pristine as it had been before. Working with time and place. Kinetic sculpture moves to underscore the passage of time. Kinetic sculpture moves to underscore the passage of time. The sculpted creatures Dutch artist Theo Jansen creates engage both place and time. Rather than standing static in one spot, Jansen's piece moves across the ground, its speed determined by the wind. Originally developed to combat the effects of climate change, Jansen's kinetic sculpture is one of a series of what he calls beach animals, each made of plastic tubing fashioned into a backbone and legs. Large sails, which he calls wings, catch the wind to drive pumps and valves that push air into plastic bottles to power the legs. When he began his early creatures, Jansen hoped that they would be used to gather sand from the beach and to deposit it onto the dunes that protect the Netherlands from rising sea levels. Each new version or evolution, Jansen calls it, addresses a challenge that the last one couldn't face. Uneven terrain, windstorms, sand accumulation in the tubing. The artist solved the problem of low wind speed using large wings and a system for storing air, bringing together physics and art. Jansen's wind-propelled kinetic sculptures interact not with the viewer, but with the natural environment and with the passage of time. The human figure in sculpture. The human figure is one of the most common subjects for sculpture, although how the figure is represented varies widely. The human figure in sculpture. Sculpted portraits of rulers may promote their rulership. From the earliest times, rulers powerful enough to maintain a workshop of artists have left images of themselves and their deeds. The ancient Babylonian king Hammurabi erected a tall stone public monument known as stele to demonstrate his power. The carved shaft is topped by a relief sculpture of the king on the left. His clothing indicates his royalty, and his body is idealized. Hammurabi stands before another idealized figure, the god Shamash, with his horned crown, staff, and flames rising from his shoulders. While hierarchy of scale makes the king smaller than the god to show their relative importance, Hammurabi is an important mortal, allowed to stand in God's presence, seated on a throne. Shamash delivers a code of laws to Hammurabi, which is inscribed in narrow columns of text and writing beneath the two figures. Placed in public, the stele not only illustrates Hammurabi's divinely sanctioned rulership, but also communicated how the people of ancient Babylon were subjected to his authority. The human figure in sculpture. Heroes and the dead are commonly commemorated through sculptures. Sculptors are often called on to memorialize the heroes and heroines of a community. People whose accomplishments or sacrifices are felt to be worthy of remembrance by future generations. Auguste Rodin's group of 6 figures here was commissioned in 1884 by the French city of Calais. It honors 6 prominent townspeople of the 14th century, when France and England were engaged in the protracted conflict known as the 100-Year War. The men had offered their lives to ransom Calais from the English, who had laid siege to it for more than a year, starving its citizens. A famous chronicle of the time preserves the men's names, and Rodin, moved by it, imagined them as individuals, each facing death and defeat in his own way, whether in pride, anger, sorrow, resignation, or despair. Barefoot, with ropes around their necks, and dressed only in their robe-like shirts, as the English king had demanded, the men pace at an irregular circle, carrying the heavy key to the city gates. Viewers must pace alongside them, for there is no angle from which all of their faces are visible. Among the human images that sculptors are often asked to make are those connected with religion and with the spirit realm. The small Haniwa sculpture of the seated warrior once sat atop a mound-shaped burial in ancient Japan. Made from coils of clay that were added in concentric circles to build up the cylindrical figure, then fired to harden the clay, the sculpture is hollow in the center. The figure's raised hands likely held a spear or other weapon that has since disappeared. Despite a detailed costume, the figure offers only essential forms, especially in the face, where we see only a wedge-shaped nose and openings to represent the eyes and mouth. While the purpose of the Japanese Haniwa tomb sculpture remains unknown, its military costume suggests that it had some kind of protective function for the deceased and in the afterlife. The human figure in sculpture. Holy figures are often represented as sculptures. Holy figures are often represented as sculptures, such as in this piece by Pedro de Mene. The human figure in sculpture. Contrapposto was an ancient Greek technique for making lifelike sculptures. The ancient Greeks cultivated the body through gymnastics and sport and admired their athletes greatly. The Olympics, after all, were a Greek invention. Not surprisingly, perhaps, they came to believe that the body itself was beautiful. From the many athletic bodies on views, sculptors derived an ideal body type governed by harmonious proportions. They gave these idealized bodies to images of gods and mythological heroes who were usually depicted nude, and also to images of male athletes who trained and competed unclothed. Finally, Greek artists developed a distinctive stance for their figures called contrapposto, and it can be seen in this statue of an athlete. Contrapposto, meaning counterpose or counterbalance, sets the body in a gentle S-shaped curve through a play of opposites. Here, the athlete's weight rests on his right foot, so that his right hip is raised and his left leg is bent and relaxed. To counterbalance this, his left shoulder is raised. By portraying the dynamic interplay of a standing body at rest, contrapposto implies the potential for motion inherent in a living being. We can easily imagine that at a moment earlier, the athlete's weight was distributed differently, and that it will soon shift again. The human figure in sculpture. Sculpture can make the human experience vivid and real. Since antiquity, the body has continued to serve as a subject through which sculptors express feelings and ideas about the human experience. For Kiki Smith, the body is a subject that connects the universal and the personal in a unique way. Kiki Smith says, "I think I chose the body as a subject not consciously, but because it is the one form that we all share." And she has said, "It is something that everybody has their own authentic experience with." Untitled depicts a woman and a man, made of beeswax and microcrystalline wax. They are everyday individuals, not the idealized athletes of ancient Greek sculpture. Fluid leaks from their bodies, their heads are down, and they rest uneasily on their metal stands. Translucent and easily damaged, the wax figure suggests human skin, vulnerability, and impermanence. Within the history of sculpture, wax is the material of lost wax casting, the material that will be discarded to make way for something else, something more durable. Kiki Smith says, I feel I am making physical manifestations of psychic and spiritual dilemmas. Smith has said spiritual dilemmas are being played out physically. Her words might just as easily have been spoken by Pedro de Mena about his Ecce Homo expressing the human experience. The human figure in sculpture. Sculptures showing human figures are not always representative of specific people. Sculptures showing human figures are not always representative of specific people. This piece, Nomad, represents a body, and it involves our bodies in the same space. Installed along a port that has welcomed sailors, merchants, and travelers since antiquity, Pence's giant figure sits gazing out to sea. The figure is made of cast aluminum letters fastened together to create a faceless hollow body. The letters do not form words, but instead suggest the possibility of communicating across cultures. Visitors are invited to walk inside the figure, to feel its immense size, but also to appreciate the words that might fill the figure's head as he stares into the distance. Plinsa allows us to bring our bodies into another body, to share a quiet moment, and to be someone else, just momentarily. This concludes Chapter 11.